I must say, I present many places. This is one of the most beautiful facilities I've ever presented in. Isn't it a wonderful place to just come for the day? And the food, everything is so wonderful here. It's great. When I give this talk, for the most part, people choose to come to it. Yes, they want to learn about the topic, but usually there is a particular student you're thinking about when you come here. And the term you used, wounded, is, I think, a perfect descriptor of many of these children and young adolescents. You know me, I like to tell stories, so I want to introduce you to 3 of my own students who were all in one way or other underachieving by either their standards or someone else's, okay? The first is Elizabeth, and let me just read to you from an essay that she wrote for one of my books. She said this: "As a child, someone once asked me, 'What do you want to be when you grow up?' I never gave a standard answer. Instead, I say, I hope to become a chemist or a teacher, perhaps an astronaut or a doctor or a spy. Or if I wanted to give my parents a jolt, I'd answer a freelance artist. But the real answer, the secret answer that I never told anyone, was this: I wanted to be great." Fast forward about a decade. I'm standing in the middle of a parking lot with a cheap plastic graduation robe tossed over my shoulder. In my arms, I'm grasping a stack full of certificates, acknowledging my tenure as class president and my involvement in virtually all of our school's extracurricular activities. Clenched between my lips, I have a few ribbons of academic merit, and in the pit of my stomach, I have a deep sense of unaccomplishment, because despite these many awards that shout ideal student, I know the truth. I'd never written a paper any earlier than the night before it was due, and studying for me consisted of cracking open the textbook for only a second or third time that semester. The glowing sense of victory I'd always expected to show up at my high school graduation had stood me up. Here's one reason why. My social studies teacher walked into the room, clapping his hands brusquely. "Okay, class, we have 3 weeks to cover. We have 3 weeks to the end of school and 10 chapters to cover. Turn to the section on the Korean War." We opened our books. "All right, now take your right hand and place it palm down over the first page." We looked at each other quizzically, but followed his instructions. "Now we've covered it," said the teacher, chuckling at his own jokes. "We're now going to learn about the Korean War," protested one student. "You don't need to know about the Korean War unless you're Korean." A hand shot up in the back of the room. "I'm Korean." "Oh, well, you can read that chapter on your own." That was her advanced placement history class, and the disappointment she felt there. Next is Jalil. Jalil is a boy I met he was a middle school student of mine. And what I'll do, I'll start with their stories, and at the end of the talk, I'll tell you what happened to these kids. Okay? So here's what he wrote. "I never got much higher than a 3.0, which is a B average, a little above average. I never went a year without going to the principal's office. I could never stop crying out for something better. This was my life throughout my education until I reached 8th grade, and I was able to understand the identity I had created for myself. People saw my grades, and they knew that I had the ability to succeed, but they also saw that I refused to apply myself. They thought I was a bad child because I was always in the principal's office, and to my peers, that also made me a dumb child. They never understood that my frustrations were due to my inability to believe in myself, which made me a lonely child. When I realized that people thought I was dumb, bad, and incapable, I was mad that I had picked these labels for myself. I could no longer blame my image on poverty, other teachers, or other students. I had created it. This revelation led to the decision that changed the course of my life, the decision to run for class president." I'll tell you what happened to Jalil later on. And the third one is a young man I've yet to meet. His name is Jason. And the first message I received from him was 14 years ago. And he wrote this in a letter. He sent me an email that I knew nothing about this young man, and the email address had the word assassin in it, which is not good. And the subject line said one word, which is desperation. Dear Dr. Delisle, I am an 18-year-old freshman in college on the verge of dropping out. I was a constant daydreamer growing up, diagnosed with ADD because I got by in school, but I was an underachiever, as most people called me. But really, what can you achieve in a school where you're not challenged and you lose interest quickly? I was prescribed medication, and I took it for a little while, but then I stopped because I hated taking it. I felt there was nothing wrong with me, and that if I can concentrate extremely well with things I liked, how could I have a problem with attention? I recently took an IQ test online, just to see where I was, and the score was above 130. I know that's not as high as some of the kids you test, but it's still a good score. I always knew I had something most other people didn't have, but I was starting to doubt that until I took the IQ test. I started reading about gifted individuals, and I related a lot to their being overexcitable about things and getting worked up over arguments with people, being very stubborn when it comes to things I know are right, and never backing down. Also, I never even wore blue jeans because I just didn't like how they felt. I'm basically failing out of college right now. My parents aren't being supportive, and basically never were, but I don't blame them. They've just been misinformed since I was a little child about who I am. At age 2, I used to love using blocks to create anything. I used to make complex, train-looking designs that were up to 30 feet in space, and I still have pictures of them. I took a lot of self-identification tests online, trying to figure out who I am, what my problems are in school, maybe even what career to pursue. I don't know where to turn or what to do. School teaches in small steps, and other people not being able to see the big picture doesn't help me at all. I can't get by in college like I could in high school when I never studied. I'm just looking for somewhere to go to discover who I really am. I'm losing hope and I'm slipping into depression. I can feel it. I don't want to feel like this. Throughout my life, I've been an optimist, but that's starting to fade. Please, can you give me the name of another psychologist who specializes in your field in the area where I live so I can reach out to get help? I feel trapped and isolated from unleashing my potential. I'm dying on the inside. Yeah, that was 14 years ago that I received that email. What I see here is underachievement does not look like one thing. You have one girl who was the top student in her whole school, and she feels that she's unaccomplished. You have 8th grade Delisle, who was always in trouble. He was labeled as a bad student and a bad individual because he was always in trouble. Came from a background of poverty and very dysfunctional home life. He thought he was an underachiever. And then you have Jason, who has so many things going on. He's very understanding of who he is, but at the same time he's looking for who he is. Okay? So underachievement can be very different, and every kid who brought you into this room today, even if they have the same label, they are very different inside. So what I'd like to do is give you some perspective on this whole idea, because I see underachievement in a whole different way than most people do, and then some strategies for how you might be able to work with these young people. I love this poem by John Masefield when he said, "I have seen flowers come in stony places, in kindness done by men with ugly faces, in the gold cup won by the worst horse at the races, so I trust too." It is very hard for you, as a teacher or counselor or whatever, to trust someone who has disappointed so many people, and a lot of underachievers feel they're doing that. It's very hard for them to trust you as an adult, because they've, as we would say, they've been burned before. They have had a lot of people who say they're going to do one thing and they do something else. So it takes a great degree of hope and courage for these kids to let any adult into their lives, just as maybe difficult for you, to work with them when they've really made life unhappy for a lot of the adults in their lives. So before we get into the specifics of underachievement, let me just go over a few things that I have found over the course of time of why kids, as I say, do poorly on purpose. It's not that they can't do the work, it's they choose not to. Sometimes it's lack of interest. They just don't care about biology, or they don't care about whatever subject you're trying to teach them. Sometimes it's a lack of challenge. Whatever you offer them, they learned 3 years ago. Why should they sit there and hear it again? It also can be because if you're a kid who's really smart and you're not doing your work, you get a lot of attention from adults who want you to do better, right? The best thing to get in life is good attention for things that you succeeded at. If you can't get that, why not get attention for negative stuff? It's better than being ignored. No one in this room, no one in this world wants to be ignored. So if you can get negative attention for not doing something, that's better than getting no attention at all. Sounds kind of weird, but it oftentimes is true. Other kids, and this is brought up, I brought it up this morning, I think you brought it up too, what I call the bottom of the top. If you're in a class with other smart kids, you know you're smart or you wouldn't be there, but when you look around, you see everyone seems to you to be smarter than you are. So why should I try at all? There's something called, I think it's called counter-contextual thinking. And let me give you an example of it. This study was done 3 different times with Olympic medal winners. And they did what they did, the researchers at Cornell University took photographs of the faces of people who won Olympic games, Olympic medals. They took facial pictures of the gold medal winner, the silver medal winner, and the bronze medal winner. And they did this over multiple sports in 3 different Olympic games. So what do you think the gold medal winner's expression was on their face? What's that? Happiness, absolute total happiness. I can't believe it. What do you think the bronze medal winner's expression was? The same thing, happiness. What do you think the silver medalists? The total disappointment, maybe not total, but disappointment, like, because they only came in second best in the world instead of number 1. So a lot of kids, maybe a lot of you, if you can't be number 1, I'd rather be lower because number 2, it came so close. So that's part of the bottom of the top syndrome, the perfectionism that feels better. And for some kids, when you give grades, I know you don't use letter grades, I don't believe, in the Netherlands, do you? Do you use number grades? Or? All right, so some kids would rather, if the best you can get is 100, and the best you can get is 10. Okay, so if the best you can get is 10, and you've really, really tried, and the best you can do is an 8, why try at all? Because it's safer intellectually and psychologically. If you get a 3, everyone says you can do better than that, you're smarter than that, and you agree with them. But if you get an 8, and it honestly was the best you could do, you feel defeated in the eyes of others. So if you get a 3, it's safer for you than if you get an 8, if everyone expects you to get a 10. Does that make sense? It will to the kids for whom they feel this. So those are some of the reactions to why you might have kids who underachieve. And I want to show you a cartoon that I think explains it all as well. You have this young kid who says, "Mom, can I have this last piece of cake?" Everything is perception here. Again, I told you my Aunt Peggy, who thought till the day she died that I was an underachiever because I didn't become the right kind of doctor. And so you have what some people might see as underachievement and others might see as total fine achievement. So we don't have a universal definition of where underachievement stops and achievement begins. We never talk about that with kids or their parents, and we should. Paul Torrance, who was one of the finest researchers ever in creativity, and he worked with a lot of people who were creative, but not academically successful in the true sense, because they just thought in much different directions. But look at what he wrote about what an underachiever is. They're made of an unexpressed idea, an unpainted picture, an unsung song, a safely hidden poem, unused talents. In other words, this is what they might be. But instead of looking at what they might be, we look at what they're not doing. And this is the whole attitude shift that almost we need to have in working with kids who underachieve. Another is this. He's my favorite cartoon character in America. His name is Skylar. And Skylar is like a 7, maybe 12-year-old, 13-year-old. Of course, in the comics, they never get older. But he is one of these kids who every teacher he'd be a nightmare when they walked into your class. Okay, so here's what he says. I don't hate school, really. I just dislike it. And then he thinks about it. With the white-hot intensity of 1,000 suns. So this kid really, really, really doesn't like school. Okay, so anyway, move on. And I'm going to give you some homework in just a minute here, but let me just end this introduction with this. That underachievement is very much like a skin rash. The symptoms may look the same, but the underlying cause is different. You have 80 people in this room, 80 kids called underachievers, 80 different reasons why and how to fix it, okay, how you might approach it. Okay, so it's like a skin rash in that sense. It's like an onion. It's like no matter how many layers you peel back, there seems to be more underneath. And thirdly, it's like a labyrinth. There are many paths to go down to success, and some of them just don't go anywhere. And it's so frustrating, trust me, I know this, where you make positive steps for a young person, and everything seems going well, and then bang, something happens and it's not going well anymore. We like to use the expression 2 steps forward, 1 step back. A lot of times with these kids, it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Okay, so this is the context of underachievement that I deal with in my own, or have dealt with in my own career. And this is the homework I want to give you, okay? Even though we'll do the homework here. This again, I'm sorry, I forgot about the slide. It's just a summary. And this presentation is going to be downloaded after the conference. So the whole thing will be on there. Plus there's some stuff that I'm not showing that'll be on there as well, okay? But again, it's a behavior, it's not an attitude. When we says, this kid has the worst attitude I've ever seen, you cannot change that directly. You change it through dealing with the behaviors, okay? Secondly, it's a perception. As I said, my Aunt Peggy, that whole story. To her, I'm an underachiever. To me, I'm doing fine. Content or situation specific. One thing I hope I never hear again, and I hear it a lot, especially from parents, is my son or my daughter is a classic underachiever. I don't know what that means. There is not a person alive who underachieves at everything. They may achieve at something you don't appreciate or care about, but they're still an achiever in some context, right? But if we say classic underachiever, it drives me nuts because that's not the case. I had one father say to me once with his son right there, his son was in college, and his son was majoring in English. And his father is introducing the son to me. He puts his arm on his son's shoulder, and he says, let me introduce you to my son. He's majoring in English, or as I call it, pre-unemployment. I wanted to punch the guy. I mean, how do you say that with your kid right there? You know, it goes back to number 2 as well as number 3 there. And it's tied in with the need for dignity, not power. The new book I have coming out is called Doing Poorly on Purpose, Strategies for Reversing Underachievement and Preserving Student Dignity. All I want as a kid who underachieves is somebody to see me for the person I am and could become, rather than the person I'm not and will be a loser for life. And so many times it's the other way around, okay? So that's the context, and now I'm going to distinguish between 2 very important, I'm not going to, you're going to, between 2 different types of underachievers, okay? So here's what I'd ask you to do. After I read you the scenarios, and if you're not a teacher, then look at it in the context of whatever role you have. I'm going to read you 2 scenarios, and which one of the 2, in a sense, brought you into this room today. And then I'm going to have you talk with each other about ways you have tried to deal with this individual in your life. So you'll be thinking of hopefully one person, maybe more, who fits one of these 2 descriptions, okay? They're both kids who I taught when they were about 11 to 12 years old, so they're somewhat younger. Let me start with Stephanie, and this is her case study. Stephanie is a 5th grader whose report card comments read like a list of missed opportunities. Stephanie is bright, but she seems insecure about her abilities. Or teachers write, Stephanie's perfectionism prevents her from starting anything new. In class, Stephanie seldom causes trouble. In fact, you hardly know she's there because she does her work cautiously And when her teacher hands her an assignment, Stephanie often says something like, "This is too hard for a stupid head like me." Often she is her own worst enemy, because when she gets a high grade on a project, she says she was lucky. And when she doesn't do well, she internalizes the failure and calls herself stupid. Socially, Stephanie fits in well with one or two friends she's had for a long time. But most students don't know her. It's not that she's totally withdrawn, but she is very quiet. Stephanie would like to do better in school, but she claims she can't. She insists she's not as smart as everyone says, and she can prove it to you by showing you all her low grades and bad papers. So you have a mental image of Stephanie. Okay? Next is Mark. I saw Mark in a counseling capacity rather than an instructional capacity. He was a 6th grader, so about 12 years old. Mark is a student most teachers hear about before they ever meet him. His reputation precedes him because Mark is the source of constant talk among teachers. They say, "You've got to approach him just so, or he'll walk all over you. He's a smart kid and he knows it. That's his biggest problem." Mark can do great work one day and no work the next. In class, Mark's performance and behavior are sporadic. On some days, he is the most animated discussant in a review of current world events, and on other days, he just sits there, completing seat work if he feels like it, and turning in homework if he wants to or not. Mark dislikes busy work and the teachers who assign it, and although he can and does succeed on projects that tap into his interests, he often concentrates only on these to the exclusion of his other lessons. This, of course, makes it difficult for teachers to assign grades. They know that Mark understands the concepts of his lessons, but if he refuses to turn in the required work, how could they possibly reward him with high grades? It wouldn't be fair. Socially, Mark has few problems. In fact, some students even see him as a leader, a rebel with a cause, an agent with a mission, to take the best of school and leave the rest behind. Almost everyone is frustrated with Mark's performance except for one person. Who? Mark, yeah. He knows he's smart, and he realizes that if he played the game by the rules, he could be a top student. Somehow, though, getting high grades isn't necessarily one of Mark's goals. He loves to learn, but it doesn't naturally follow that school is the place where lots of learning occurs. Okay, so there was Stephanie and Mark, both labeled underachievers. As my mother would say, they're as different as chalk and cheese in many capacities. But I want you to talk with each other for a few minutes first and answer these two questions. Which of the two have you seen more often in your capacity? And whichever one you choose, what have you done or tried to do to help the situation? So take a few minutes for that. And before I start asking specific questions to you, how many of you, when you started talking about students like Stephanie? Just raise your hand if you talk more about the Stephanies. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, okay. How many talked about Mark? The majority. That happens all the time. Why does Mark get more hands raised? Because he drives you crazy. Mark demands your attention. When I was getting my master's degree, it was in teaching children with emotional disorders. And I remember one of my professors saying, the lucky kids will act badly in class. They'll act out in class. And I'm thinking, this person is crazy. Who wants kids to act out in class? But he was right, because the lucky ones get our attention. When they're throwing books at you, when they're swearing at you, when they're flipping you the bird, you cannot make believe they're not there. But with Stephanie, guess what? She's quiet. She's not ignored, but she's not priority, because she's not forcing you to be attending to her. That's sad. And I think of both cases, the one that's more serious is actually kids like Stephanie, because there's so much hidden underneath that doesn't come out, or at least with Mark, like it or not, it's there. Okay. Well, let's talk about why you selected what you did. So we need a volunteer to talk about a Mark that you worked with and what you've tried to do to make it better for him and for you. Any volunteers for that one? I thought there was a yes, so.
There is a guy like Mark on a school nearby, and it was so bad with him that his chemistry teacher didn't want him in class anymore.
Okay.
So the school had to either send him off because there was only one chemistry teacher, or they had to find some other solution. So now I'm tutoring Mark 2 hours a week. So he gets, instead of 3 hours with the lessons, so he's getting private tutoring, and he will get a high mark. But in fact, he is the chemistry teacher is not very happy with it, because she says he gets something very positive for very bad habits, and that's of course true. For Mark, it's okay in this case.
You bring up a very good point, though, that sometimes when it doesn't work with one teacher and one student, and then we go someplace else and it works with you, we sometimes take that as a personal slight, without, in fact, looking at the real goal, which is Mark now learning? And yes, I wouldn't say that it's a bad thing to do at all, but as a teacher who didn't succeed with Mark, you can see how that person might take it personally. And that's sad, because the ultimate goal is Mark going to succeed? And it may not be in the typical way, but if he's showing what he knows, then again, we'll get into that in a little bit. But I give the school credit for looking for another option, I really do. Okay. How about with Stephanie? Who talked about Stephanie?
My Stephanie is called Lisa. She's 10 years old, and we saw her from basically 8 years old, that she was able to do much more than we would see. And teachers used to call her shy, and she would never just start enthusiastically with something. She would always start, what's it supposed to look like? How do I have to do this? I don't know. I can't. Whatever it was they were asking her.
Okay.
So we saw this for a couple of years, and then we decided that even though she didn't really have the grades, we did have to challenge her and ask her to be part of our plus class Scarabée, and also to always ask her to do whatever she did for that one morning in the week at Scarabée, to present it in class. Mm-hmm. So she could also tell them what she found difficult, but also what her successes were. And now, slowly, she's coming out of her shell. And that's such a beautiful thing to see. I'm very, very proud of that.
I'm very proud of you for that story, as well as that success. That's a great story to hear. These two kids obviously are very different, even though if you looked at their grade reports, they may look very similar. And this is how I want to challenge you now, is to see, this is one of my books that has a lot of things about this in there, sorry. But the kids like Mark, I call him, or kids like him, a selective consumer. Under the right conditions, with the right teacher, they will perform. And they'll perform well, and you'll be talking to a colleague, like your chemistry example, it's working for you. Well, other teachers say, you can keep him all day, I don't care, because he will work for people who he thinks respect him and his intelligence and just himself as a person, okay? People like Stephanie, I do call underachievers. And let's just take a look at how they differ and how they're, in some cases, the same. And these are, I hate when I put up lists that they're not exactly true for every child, obviously, but for the majority of kids with whom I've worked, these fit. Mark is very independent and proactive. If he wants to learn something, he has the skills to do it, and he has the initiative to do it. Stephanie is very dependent on you. She says things like you said, well, I don't think I'm good at this, and I'm not sure. She's always questioning her own abilities to do whatever it is you ask her to do. Mark will tend to rebel. If he doesn't like something, you know it. Not so Stephanie. She tends to withdraw, and she'll just feel, I'm really dumb at this, but the teacher gave it to me, and so she still inside feels she's incapable, but at the same time, she won't tell you anything like that. Teachers are often seen as adversaries for kids like Mark until you can prove that you're on his team. Where with Stephanie, she totally respects you as a teacher. She respects your role. She wants to do well because she wants to please you. Not so much herself, Mark doesn't care if he pleases you or not. If it's something he wants to learn, then he'll go ahead and try to learn it. He doesn't require the structure that Stephanie does. You can't say to Stephanie, just do whatever you'd like, because she wouldn't know what to pick. But if you give her some structured things to do, usually in small pieces at first, she tends to succeed later, over time. Mark's performance will vary by teacher. Stephanie generally does uniformly poor work. It's not a teacher dependency on hers. I had one kid, his name was Mark, not this one, but a different one. And I was brought into his life when he was a 6th grader. And it was the most confusing case we could remember dealing with, because here was a kid who in 6th grade would have the highest grade you could get in math, and then they switched teachers, and then halfway through the year, he'd get the lowest grade you can get in math. And it varied by subject. There was no consistency to it. And we were just at odds with what is going on with this kid? So I got to know him fairly well, and again, a counseling capacity. And this is what he told me. He gives every teacher a 3-week trial period, okay? And at the end of 3 weeks, if he's doing well in the class, which he generally does, then he will come to you and he'll say, I've gotten high grades on all the tests, I've turned in the homework, and then he'd say, instead of doing the rest of the work, can I do something different that was more independent for him? If the teacher said yes, he was the ideal student you'd want in class every day. If the teacher was like, Mark, do you know how many kids I have to teach every day? If I did it for you, I'd have to do it for everyone. Those kind of comments. Mark would raise hell the rest of that marking term. And every year, after about 6 weeks, our grading period is 9 weeks long. So every week, every marking term, in the 6th week time, he would have a listing of all of the classes that he was in, like math, science, whatever, and he would grade the teachers. And he would say, I'm allowing this teacher to give me an 8. I'm allowing this teacher to give me a 3. And when he got his grade report, if it didn't match, he was very angry. Because if he got an 8 and he deserved a 4, he would say, that teacher doesn't even care. That teacher doesn't know. I'm thinking, this kid, whoa, he's got this whole world going on. But he gave you a 3-week trial. And if you passed, life was good. If you didn't, life was hell. So, it goes like that. So those are the kind of things where I say performance will vary by teacher. School resources are usually sufficient to deal with Mark. You just find another way to reach the talents and abilities he has. With Stephanie, family intervention, counseling. Mark doesn't need a lot of counseling. He needs somebody to be honest with him. And the counselors can do that, but he doesn't need the kind of longer-term counseling or support that a girl or a student like Stephanie would. Mark can change overnight, again, depending on the teacher. Stephanie's progress is long-term, and he's seldom perfectionistic, unless it's something he's truly interested in. In Stephanie, even with the littlest thing, she's a perfectionist about it. This is the young person who, when they turn in a paper, there's eraser marks that are so strong the paper's actually ripped, because he's trying to make everything look perfect, okay? And lastly, that Mark sees himself as academically capable. Stephanie does not. And the cases I have are male and female. That's how I generally have seen them, but certainly it can be either gender in either category. I'm just bringing the two up as the ones I've seen most frequently, yes. I'm going to have, they're taping this, so we need to use this, sorry.
I was wondering, in how much do you see not the kid as the cause for, especially the dependent underachiever there?
Right.
I've seen a 10-year-old girl that I gave her a different kind of glue, and she's like, I've never used this. Basically didn't dare. I see the mom doing things in the same way. Mm-hmm. How much do you think it comes from there or from within the kid? Yeah,
a lot of times the question was about when you see a tendency in a child not to want to try anything new, can it come from home? It certainly can. It depends on the kind of reaction she gets when she makes a mistake, the kind of reaction she gets when she doesn't make a mistake and she does well. I'm sure it plays a role to please the mom, yeah. Yeah, and you can sometimes, it's almost like a negative enabling that between the parent and the student, for sure. That can happen. And that's why when I said counseling is more of an issue in family intervention for kids who perform like Stephanie, it's because that's why it will take longer to address the issues. But the thing is, when you read most of the books on underachievement, I'm not a fan of most of them, because most of them treat these kids the same way. And you can't really do that because they are different enough that, again, Stephanies of the world need much more of a consoling and counseling relationship with little tidbits of you're doing better, how can you prove it, and how can you see it? I like to have kids like Stephanie work with younger kids because they'll look and go, boy, are you smart? And she needs to be reinforced. Mark doesn't need that. He needs somebody to be honest with him and say, dude, do it. You know, get it done in 10 minutes, and then move on to something else. But those are the kids when most of the underachievement work has you treat the kids the same way. I'm going to talk more about the selective consumer, but let me give you one source for the underachievers who are like Stephanie. It's the best resource I can give you, and it's old. Okay? It came out in 1980, and it was a book called Giftedness, Conflict, and Underachievement. I get goosebumps talking about it. Giftedness, Conflict, and Underachievement. It was written by a woman named Joanne Whitmore, W-H-I-T-M-O-R-E. I'll tell you a little bit about it, and then a secret that you can't tell her, okay? Joanne was a primary school teacher in a very wealthy area of California. It's now Silicon Valley, very wealthy, high-tech, but at the time it was Stanford University, so again, very wealthy, high-educated area. And she taught in a primary school where the majority of parents were affluent, very well-educated, as I said, and many of the kids were the same. But they'd come to school, and in more than one case, in multiple cases, the kids either were afraid to come to school, they'd get physically sick before they did because they were so afraid of what would happen, you know, to their egos and academics once they got there. They were getting in fights, all manners of things were going on with kids who were just feeling totally out of place. Many of them had labels of emotionally disordered. And Joanne was looking at these children going, no. So what the principal had done was he gave one kid to each teacher, so no teacher would have too many of these kids, which was a kind gesture, but it didn't work. Everyone's class was disrupted. What Joanne recommended was, why don't you put them all in my class? There were like 12 or 15 kids. Put them all in my class for 3 years. And we are going to run our classroom like a family rather than a factory. There were team meetings or class meetings every day. Most everything was hands-on instruction because these kids were so afraid of doing anything in writing that might be wrong. So a lot of it was social studies and science-based, project-based and all, class meetings, very emotionally rich classroom environment. And she found over those 3 years that every one of these kids was able to then go to a regular 4th grade class with very little problem. It just worked. And she wrote that book, describes in great detail the program that she offered for those 3 years. My favorite story about Joanne, because Joanne ended up being the dean of my college where I was a professor, so we got to know each other very well. And she talked about this one young kid named Tommy, and she taught him in 1st through 3rd grade, and he was just tough to deal with. But he succeeded very well in those 3 years. And so when she interviewed him in the 4th grade, her question was, do you remember what you were like as a 6-year-old? And Tommy's answer was this: when I remember myself when I was 6, my eyes get wet. If a kid notices that, you know something is right. So the secret is I dedicated my new book to Joanne, because she's the one who really took this underachievement piece and put it in a respectful context that so many other authors do not do. Okay? So again, Giftedness, Conflict, and Underachievement. It's a powerful book, and she's a fabulous writer. It's hard to find, it's out of print. Thanks to Amazon, we can find anything, but still, it's a book that if you're really dealing with kids like Stephanie, that would be a good book to get. Yes?
What is the relation between Silicon Valley and these kids? And what is the conflict?
The relation with Silicon Valley and these kids is many of them, again, come from highly educated, highly affluent backgrounds, so the expectations, even from your young children, are extremely high. And not to get too morbid about this, but there has been in Silicon Valley, I was just there last week actually, in Silicon Valley, there have been a rash of teenage suicides by kids jumping in front of trains. And this is probably 6 or 7 within the past 2 years. every one of these kids was highly successful academically. But if you couldn't get into Stanford, your life was over from their perspective. So I'm not blaming the parents, but the culture itself was set up in such a way that even if you succeeded at a very high level, the kids felt like imposters. Okay, I didn't fail this time, I will the next time. And to take your life or to attempt it, they call it now the Silicon Valley Syndrome, actually, because so many kids have either taken or attempted to take their lives, even though if you looked at them without knowing them, these kids had it made. They had it all. So that's another element to it as well. All right, let me begin. This is like a 15-week course I'm trying to do in a little over an hour, so it's a little bit hard. But these are the areas that I'd focus on, and I want to give examples of each, a few examples. And again, I hate to sell my book, but the one coming out in January does have many more examples than I'll give you today. But these are what I call the 5 C's that kids are looking for. Control over at least some aspects of either how or what they're learning, which goes along with choice. So it's not always what the teacher directs, but maybe what I can help direct myself. The challenge to do something that I'm actually learning something new rather than repeating what I already know. The complexity of giving something more than just a one-word answer, but doing something that really is much more involving than that. And the most important characteristic, and I have some fabulous examples, is caring teachers. Again, these kids give you maybe a 3-week window, but sometimes it's shorter than that. Sometimes it's 20 minutes. And they know whether you're there for them or whether they're there for the paycheck. These are the kids who pick that up quicker than anyone. Okay? So the control one is just one example of this, and I want to ask what advice you would have given to this school principal who wrote to me. She wrote about a middle school kid, so again, 6th grade or so, and she said, we have a student who's taking 6th grade who's taking Algebra 1. He has a very high IQ as well as ADHD. He's an only child at home, and he doesn't seem to have a lot of boundaries or consequences in his home life. He is the kind of kid who, when the teacher gave the directions for an activity to figure out which human skulls dated from earliest to latest, he left the classroom, ran across the hall to the computer lab, because he said he could find the answers quickest on Google. And when he was told he had to return the class and do the assignment as he was supposed to do it, he figured out that the skulls were on pages with different page numbers. And therefore, he could figure out which came first to last by the page numbers associated with each skull. Needless to say, his teachers are frustrated by his inability to follow directions and do the things he's supposed to do as assigned. And instead, he's always finding loopholes for every assignment. What should the teachers do? So what do you give as an answer? What do I give? Get smarter. What else?
Explain what the assignment is about. What are you trying to teach?
Okay, explain what the assignment is. And why, was there a specific method of why they should be doing it this way? Okay? You're kinder than I was. I wrote back, and I never heard a response, so I don't think she liked my answer. I said, as I read your email about the 6th grader, I couldn't but find a part of myself that wanted to say, you go, kid. Indeed, if we're trying to teach kids 21st century skills, and this kid has the wherewithal to get his answers in a technologically sophisticated way, how can he be faulted? The problem, it seems to me, is not one of gaining knowledge, but gaining the upper hand. In the disjunction, the student has it. I said, why can't the teacher and the kid get together and figure out a way to do an assignment that was meaningful? This one apparently wasn't, and I can see why. And again, she never wrote back. But there are certain fights you don't want to get into as a parent or as a teacher. To me, this is one of them. There were bigger things going on than using technology to find an answer to something that you don't think is a relevant question. Again, some people might disagree with that, but at the same time, I think we have to choose our battles, as I said, as parents and teachers. Mine with our son was, okay, you want to wear your hair down to your shoulders? I'm cool with that, because I had too many fights with my own father when I tried to do it when I was his age. So there are certain things you have to recognize and just let go. Teachers are control freaks. We all are. That's part of our job. That's part of our DNA. We like control. Giving it up is hard, but for kids like this, giving it up is almost essential. Okay. Next one is choice. Let's see what I have up there for that. All right. I mentioned this morning, so I'll just say it again, that if you can get a hold of this, which is going to be a new book on self-advocacy for gifted adolescents, you will thank me, because this lady offers amazing advice about how kids can take their own education and make something meaningful out of it. This is one thing that's in the book that I wrote maybe 20 years ago, and more than that, and I've used it since then, and it works. It's too wordy here for you to copy and stuff, but it's called 10 Tips. You can find it online for sure. 10 Tips for Talking to Teachers. If you have a kid who really is smart and wants to do something his or her way, but doesn't know how to go about asking that from a teacher, this is a 10-step way to do that. The first thing you do is make an appointment. You don't just stop the teacher in the hall and say, yo, we gotta talk. It's not gonna work. Nothing gonna happen. And then if you know other students who feel the same way, don't go in as a gang, but go in so you can conserve the teacher's time and your own, okay? Thirdly, think through what you want to say before you say it. Go in with an agenda. That's what professionals do when they have a meeting about something important. So you think ahead of time about what you'd like to say. Number 4, choose your words carefully. If you say, I hate doing reports, they're boring and a waste of time, that's not going to get you very far with most teachers. If instead you provide an alternative, could I do a video instead? You give not only a problem, but a solution. Teachers are busy folks. We may not have all the solutions, but if you have one, let me know what it is. And strike the word boring from your vocabulary. It just sends shivers up teachers' spines when somebody says to them, this is a boring class. Get rid of that word, it's not going to help you. And as I say to kids all the time, if you are bored, you're pretty boring to be around. Get over yourself, and let's see what you can do to make education better for you. Okay, that's the kind of talk you need to have with kids like Mark. And those others are here. And number 10 is, maybe the teacher you start with didn't help. That'll happen. Sometimes in meetings you don't get what you want. If you don't get what you want, but you still think you have a valid point, who else can you invite into the conversation to try to make something better? All right, I don't want to give kids power, but I want to give them some autonomy in thinking. This education piece is important enough for me that I need to be proactive. I need to be the one, because the teacher can't read my mind. So this 10 tips really has helped kids along the way. Next is challenge, and I want to give you one example, 2 examples actually. This is one from another book you need to buy, called How to Think Like Leonardo da Vinci. I bought it for, I think, 50 cents on Amazon, so it's very cheap. And it didn't start out as a self-help book, but that's kind of what it became. What this man did, Michael Gelb, is he took a look at the life of Leonardo da Vinci, who he said was the most creative genius to ever live. And so what he does is he read any biography and the autobiographies, anything he could find about da Vinci, he read. And he realized that da Vinci learned through in multiple ways, including these. So the Italian words on the side are actually the chapter titles. And inside, he tells you how you can become more curious, how you can become, with Fumato, more accepting of not knowing as a part of the learning process. And he gives you activity after activity, skill after skill. It's an awesome book. You don't need to go through it cover to cover. But for you or kids who are trying to do something to enhance these, this book for 50 cents would be a good buy. Okay, so look at that one. The next one I want to do is put you back to Joanne Whitmore's book. This is the book I mentioned earlier. And she talks about 3 types of strategies that you do with kids like this. The supportive strategies are the ones where you can see right there, you eliminate the work the kids already know how to do. You have a classroom atmosphere that's not authoritarian, but more, as she said, family versus factory. You also have intrinsic strategies, which is how you make that family atmosphere. So you set class rules together, allow students to set personal goals, etc. And remedial strategies, because with a lot of kids, especially the selective consumers, they have bypassed a lot of school lessons, so they will have skill gaps. As smart as they are, there'll still be some things they don't know how to do that are kind of simple, but they bypass them. So if you do have to remediate any of their skills, these are some ways to do it. Okay, so that's, again, taken from the wisdom of Joanne Whitmore. The next is complexity, and here's the example I really love. This is from a kid who I highlight in my new book. His name is Hart Main, and the story starts, he was in Entrepreneur magazine, a big national publication, when he was 12 years old. A full-page spread on this 12-year-old boy, so obviously he's done something pretty cool. Well, what he did was this. His sister was a Girl Scout, and she had to sell candles for a fundraiser. So she brings the candles home, and Mark's smelling them, or Hart's smelling them. And he says, this smells like roses, this smells like strawberries. No guy is ever going to buy these candles. Okay. So he's decided that he was going to take a $100 loan from his parents, as well as taking $100 from his paper route that he had, and he was going to start a new candle company called Man Cans. Man Cans has scents like sawdust, coffee, fresh cut grass, campfire, bacon, grandpa's pipe, new baseball mitt, and pizza. So he started this company, and within months, he had just gone to one store after another in his hometown and got them to take the candles on consignment. He ended up selling about 900 of them, took it online, mancans.com, and so far, 4 years later, has sold over 300,000 candles. They called Man Cans because each candle comes in a soup can. And each candle he sells, he gives a free can of soup to a homeless shelter in one of 4 different states. I get goosebumps thinking about this. This kid is now a college freshman at the university where I used to teach, where he's majoring in economics. But this kid has changed the world. He and his dad wrote a book about it. One Can, One Meal, I think it's called. And so you have this kid, and I'm thinking, wow, think of all the skills involved in this. The school skills involved in needing to start a business and keep it going. And I bet none of this had anything to do with what he did on a day-to-day basis in school. Why can't we take what they love outside of school and make it a part of school? Not for every kid, but for kids like this, for kids like Mark, for kids like Stephanie, maybe just tying them all together. I just love the story of Hart and what he did. And the last category is caring teachers. And I have a couple examples of that. You have your own, I'm sure. And this one, I can't show you the picture until after I tell you the story. And it's an old story. This happened in the year 1999, real old. But there was a teacher in Denver, Colorado, who taught high school for over 30 years. But when he started teaching 30-something years ago, he said to his students, I want you to come back to the public library, the Denver Public Library downtown, on January 1st of the year 2000. And I want you each to give me $1. This was his first year of teaching. He said, I'm going to teach for a long time. If every student I ever taught comes back and brings me $1, by then I'll be married and I'll have enough money to take my wife to Tahiti. So he said this for more than 30 years. Goes to the Denver Public Library on January 1st of the year 2000, not knowing if anyone would remember or even be there. And more than 100 of his students from previous years showed up. They collected $750 from those students, which he gave away to the Catholic Workers' Soup Kitchen because that's not enough to get you to Tahiti. But then the media got a hold of this, and as you can see on the top, Air France, Delta, and Tahiti Tourist Board surprised Dick Jordan and his wife by giving him a free trip to Tahiti. Which of your teachers would you come back 30 years later, not because of what they taught you, but because of who they are and who they believed in you, how they believed in you? And that's what Dick Jordan did. Another example of things you need to start asking your kids who are underachievers or selective consumers especially. And this is another book I'd highly recommend. If what I'm talking about with you makes sense, then you need this book. This is written by Jean Peterson, who is a school counselor, a university professor now, a phenomenal woman. But when you get a whole bunch of kids together, it's like The Breakfast Club, one of my favorite movies of all time. And it's like the kids in The Breakfast Club. Why not ask them these questions? Where in your life are you letting your intelligence show? Do you ever ask a kid who doesn't achieve that question? Who believes you're intelligent? I love number 3. What would happen if you started achieving? Everything changes. Expectations, are you ready for those? You know, when you do poorly on purpose, who gives you attention? And who are you being loyal to when you do poorly on purpose? What are you sacrificing by doing so? These are important questions. And they transcend the role of teacher and counselor. It just makes you a unit of two caring or multiple caring human beings. So take a look at these. I think they're very powerful. And this last one I have, before we get into the kids I started with, if you were in my last session, this would be a repeat. But this was a senior in high school whose mom gave me this. And he had a great lesson from his senior thesis advisor, which, as you can see on the top, says, a means of introducing yourself. Write me a letter. The letter needs to focus on your experiences as a writer, as well as your goals, personal and academic, for the senior year. Great assignment. Here's how Brett responded. Let's get one thing out of the way. I'm lazy. Now, I don't see this as an insult, as some others would. I just lack the motivation to reach the heights I could. I've never been the overachiever or the A student. I've never been the sports star or the future president. I honestly could care less about some letter on a paper judging work I didn't care about in the first place. I could sit here and feed you some BS, which he spells out, about drive and passion, but then you'd only expect it of me and disappoint yourself. I used to have a passion and fire for the written word. I wrote poems, songs, and stories almost every day. I wasn't complete without a pen in my hand. Then the public education system killed my passion in cold blood. Prompts, essays, written responses were the beasts that killed my love of the art, broken down into nothing more than mediocre paragraphs and lackluster essays. The pen that was once inseparable from my hand was now the shackle of my oppression. Page 2, which I'll show you in a minute. My goals have changed and now focus on my art. For the pencils, which once wrote exciting stories and tales of wonder, now draw pictures dedicated to cynicism and spite. You'll see me in the back of the classroom drawing almost all of the time, and try as you might to stop me, it's the only thing I care about anymore, because the assassins that once destroyed my passion for writing will not do the same with my art. So there it is, a glimpse into my writing style and mind. I have no more passion, I have no more motivation. School is no longer a house of learning that it once was for me. It is now only a twisted prison filled with others like me whose dreams were pounded out of them by the harsh mallet of conformity. I always ask, who wants to meet this kid? I'm like, yeah. What kind of comments would you put on his paper? See me after class. We need to talk. So I said this to the mom, and she showed me this, and she didn't show me the second page, just as I didn't to you. She just read it to me. And when she showed it to me, I got tears in my eyes, because this is how the teacher responded. Brett, I love that your voice came through on this, but try to avoid swearing. Also, you need a greeting and salutation. She did not give him an assignment. He gave one to her, and she failed. I am not a teacher basher, but in this case, with such rich, incredible language, and when he says, I have no more passion, oh, give me a break. This whole thing is passion. And if somebody chooses not to perform, I can see why. I met Brett a couple years after he wrote this. He ended up actually dropping out of high school, went back, got his GED, and is now in college and has his own internet business and stuff. But he said, yeah, she just didn't get me. And he said she quit teaching after 2 years. And I said, Brett, in my estimation, she was never a teacher at all. I don't know how you give an assignment like this and get a response like this and care about a greeting and salutation. It just doesn't make sense. Anyway. All right, let me go back to the kids we started with. Wherever they are. Let's see. Oh, here they are. Okay. Elizabeth, the one who was the straight A valedictorian of her school, the whole bit, ended up, and this happens a lot, she didn't have a good education from her perspective, so she wanted to make it better, so she became a teacher of gifted kids, and is now in Texas as a school administrator at a residential school for gifted children. I can't imagine a better school administrator than her for that. Jalil, the 8th grade who ran for class president. I'll just read to you what he wrote. I'm proud of what I did for myself, but I would not be able to, because he became class president, I would not be able to tell this story if it wasn't for other people, parents, friends, teachers, who gave me a chance to change. They saw in me a greatness that I denied, and they did everything they could to open my eyes to it. My father taught me the importance of my education, and now I had to make a better life for myself than he had made for himself. My mother inspired me daily as I watched her hold together a household of 6 children with a powerful confidence and a mighty compassion. Numerous teachers sensed my desire to reach beyond my circumstances. Even friends supported me however they could, even if I had little to give them back, but a thank you. These people are why I graduated high school as an honors student, captain of my track team, and class president for all 4 years. It's been startling to know that people, many from completely unrelated backgrounds, thought I deserved a chance. A poor African-American male from a single-parent household who had never been formally identified as gifted. But I soon realized they were giving me a chance to do better because they saw I was giving myself a chance. I now attend an Ivy League college. In fact, I just graduated from Dartmouth College in the States. And I'm dedicating my life to reaching back and giving out. I started this mission back in 8th grade by raising $5,000 for hurricane victims and moved on to start a club for underachieving black males like myself. I do not have money, a big house, or a new car, but I do have something to offer, and I'm obligated to share that with whomever I can. I only want to give others a chance to help learn themselves because that's what they gave to me. I understand that although our individual struggles make us great, those struggles can also hinder us from tapping into that greatness. From our perspective, life is just a series of chances, and those who succeed are the ones who are prepared and audacious enough to take them. So his own self-confidence given to him in his perspective by friends, teachers, and others who stopped believing that he was the bad, dumb kid because of his behaviors, but he had to recognize it himself. And lastly, with Jason, the boy, the young man who wrote me about wanting to better himself, I recommended after we probably shared, I'm not kidding, 100 to 200 emails over the last years. And the first one was 2003, we're still in touch today, or on Facebook together. But I asked him to drop out of college. He was in a community college. He was self-medicating to get through because he thought the classes were so boring. So I found a way for him to take college classes independently in psychology and philosophy. And he found he was able to do that with a professor who was willing to work with him at a university near his home. So, I mean, page after page. But we lost touch for a little bit of time. And like 4 years after, everything it seemed to go well, so I kind of waited and contacted him again. And about 4 years ago, he sent me this, and then this obviously updates. When I wrote him, I said, let's just reconnect. What's going on? He said, oh man, I can't believe you remember those emails. It seems like so long ago. I ended up joining the Navy. I just finished up with the Naval Nuclear Power Program, stationed in Virginia on the USS Enterprise. It's the very first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. I'm a nuclear mechanic, which sounds way cooler than it really is. The nuke program was tough, but I made it through. So thank you for taking the time to respond to those emails so long ago. I was just a crazy, confused kid. You really helped me figure out where I needed to go. And then the most recent one, I said, I talk to people all the time about you, Jason. Give me an update. And he said this, since a very young age, I couldn't wait to be an adult, so I would get the respect I thought I deserved. I'm full of questions about life, not just about the material teachers are supposed to teach me. I craved some connection that I didn't get, so I withdrew from reality, daydreaming all day, every day, and then later on, playing computer games and surfing internet porn. But the school system didn't offer me any guidance to personal development. A smart guidance counselor would have been wonderful, someone to engage me in thought about life. Now I seek out those who are intelligent and mature enough to question the very basic ideas that we all live by. I'm learning about life from the ground up and making mistakes that many people have made before me. So thank you for seeking me out after all these years. I enjoy and I will enjoy our continued conversations. That's who you are. That's how you can be for your Jasons, your Stephanies, your Marks, whoever they are. And I'm hoping that some of these pieces of advice help you to better understand and work with the kid who brought you into this room today. If that kid is still in your life, call them tonight, write them an email, and tell them that you learned something about them today. And if you want to share that sheet, that Underachievers Selective Consumer sheet, I have shared that with many teenagers, and they said, yeah, that's me, and get the beginning of a conversation. Okay, thank you so much for coming today. I hope it was worthwhile. And again, this will be downloaded at some point right after the conference is over. Okay, thank you so much.